October 15. Buried Cooper fairly decently in some old sacking at a Belgian cemetery. No orders came through, and we had a day of welcome rest. October 16. Company moved forward at 10:30 a.m. to battle areas and took over billets from a company of our left division. There are no signs of war here, and almost every man in the company has a bed to sleep in, splendid grazing for the horses and lots of vegetables in the fields for ourselves. It is all like fairyland, and we walked out solemnly this afternoon to look at a large green field without a single shell hole in it. Reports state that we have taken Courtrai, and streams of refugees coming back along the roads indicate that it may be true. Unfortunately, they are all of the very lowest classes, and as they only speak Flemish, we were unable to get any information out of them. It is a heartbreaking sight to see them trudging through the rain, old men, women, and the tiniest of children. Sometimes they wheel a barrow containing a few of their goods, but most of them are without anything except the miserable rags they stand in. October 17. Had the company out all day doing road drainage. The tedium of the work was relieved by a ghastly incident showing how low these poor refugees have sunk. A party of them were trudging listlessly along the road when the leaders noticed a dead horse lying in the ditch. In a few seconds, the men and women had taken their knives and were fighting like animals on the distended carcass, chattering and shrieking like a crowd of hungry jackals. As they worked, they threw the chunks of bleeding meat into the road, where the children fought for them and stowed them in the barrows. In a few minutes, the horse was stripped to his bones. The noise subsided, and the ghouls trudged on their way. October 18. Working on the road all day in heavy rain, but were called out again at night to form a bridgehead across the river in front of us. We are in possession of half the town on the near side of the river, but the Germans have destroyed all the bridges and hold the eastern half of the town. The main road bridge in the center of the town lay across the bed of the river in a maze of twisted steelwork. We were required to make a footbridge across these ruins for the infantry to get across. Day climbed across with 3 men and a Lewis gun on the ruins of the old bridge and cleared a German machine gun party out of the farther bank. After this, we started work and made fair progress considering the vile conditions, with the river sucking and swirling below them and the cold rain numbing their fingers. It was anything but an easy task for the men to keep their foothold on the slippery, twisted girders. In addition, we were shelled persistently through the night, and 7 men were down when the 1st Infantry went across about 4 a.m. October 19, an hour after our return to billets. Orders came through for us to move forward again. The other companies got 2 pontoon bridges across the river during the day, and we billeted near at hand to provide maintenance parties. I was very tired and turned into bed early, looking forward to a long night's sleep. Just as I was dozing off, the orderly corporal came in with a message from the bridge patrol asking me to go out as numerous things were going wrong. There is no worse torture for a really tired man than to allow him to get into a warm, comfortable bed for a few minutes and then turn him out into a stormy night, and I had been living all day on the strength of the night's sleep that I was going to get. Arrived at the bridges, I had no time for regrets. The river was rising, the traffic was absolutely continuous, and everything that could go wrong was doing so. However, we kept them going all night long with the exception of a 20-minute stopping of one bridge, and Day relieved me at 6 a.m. I was relieved in more senses than one, for 2 or 3 times during the night I felt things getting too much for me, things that I would have enjoyed 3 years ago. Wild, angry thoughts went running through my mind as we struggled with that creaking, groaning bridge and nursed it through the weary hours. And worst of all, the bitter thought that so long as we succeeded, none of the sleeping millions at home would ever hear of the work we did. And thousands of men all over France were doing just the same. Why should I be alone there in the dark with that nerve-racking responsibility? And why should we splash in that freezing water, heaving anchors, tightening trestle chains, and bailing the leaky pontoon? And all unknown. These are bitter thoughts, but I'm worn out. For months I have been living on my willpower, but my body and my nerves were exhausted a year ago. I find it cynically amusing to wonder what the idealistic, rugby-playing self of 1913 would think of this introspective, nerve-shattered crock. He would have sniffed and turned away. Would have sniffed and turned away when we return. October 20. standing to all day under 1 hour's notice to move as the forward division are attacking the ridge which overlooks the Scheldt. In the evening we heard that the attack was held up and failed, and we are to try our luck tomorrow. At 9:30 p.m. I rode forward with No. 2 section with orders to join the Fusiliers before dawn. It was abnormally dark, raining persistently, and I had the greatest difficulty in finding our way. Worst of all, I had to conquer an ever-growing feeling that I didn't care whether I found it or not. Even that little responsibility was too much for me. I wanted to be alone to cry. After 2 hours I fell into a coma and then dismounted and walked to prevent myself giving way altogether. We found the brigade at 3 a.m., and I put the men into a barn for 2 hours' rest. I gave orders to be called at 5 and turned into an armchair in the farmhouse kitchen. For the first time since I came to France, my nerves gave way completely and I was tormented with fears of the morrow. I had just been told that we were to go forward with the Fusiliers against the banks of a canal and help them across as well as we could. There would be machine gun fire and no cover. Those were the facts. We have done infinitely worse 1,000 times and thought nothing of it. But I lay in that chair for 2 hours, actually shivering with fear and apprehension. My crazy mind wouldn't rest, and I saw myself killed in a dozen different ways as we rushed for the canal bank. At one time I had the wildest impulse to run away and hide until the attack was over. I knew that was impossible, and then I thought I would report sick and pretend to faint. I was ready to do anything except face machine gun fire again. Once we got so close that I could see a German's face leering behind his gun, and the familiar death rattle was as loud as thunder in my ears. I sat and watched my hand shaking on the edge of the chair, and had no more control over it than if it had belonged to someone else. Somehow I pulled together when the orderly corporal came, paraded the section, mechanically inspected the tools, and then marched off. In 10 minutes I was myself again, and at 6:30 we reached the Fusiliers. At 7 the advance commenced in drizzling rain, and we moved forward over the sodden fields. October 21. It was very misty at first, and the whole affair reminded me of a Latham's plain manoeuvre. The scattered groups of men worked steadily forward over the open fields, and occasionally a nervous civilian would take a peep at us from a farmhouse window. There was no sign of war except, perhaps, an unnatural stillness which seemed to hang over the countryside like a mist. It gave one an uncanny feeling, this blundering forward in the mist across an unknown country, the only certainty that death was in front and that we must walk on until he declared himself. By 11 we were within 1,000 yards of the canal and could dimly see the general line of the banks in front of us. Here, at least, we knew that there would be resistance, but as yet there came no sound from the rising ground in front. The ground between us and the canal was very open, so we rested some minutes behind the last thick hedges and took the opportunity of reorganizing the units. Then we went forward again, a long straggling line of crouching figures who cursed and panted as they toiled over the swampy ground. At last the storm broke, heavy machine gun fire, but at rather long range. The line flopped down into the mud, and groups of men began to work forward in short rushes to a ditch in front which seemed to offer cover. We reached this with very few casualties, but the fire was too hot for further progress. Sniping continued all day, and in places we pushed 200 or 300 yards nearer to the canal. No, 2 section took refuge in a farmhouse and awaited developments. After dusk I crawled forward with Jennings of the Fusiliers and got through onto the canal towpath. There were a lot of Huns round the canal, and their outposts were fully 300 yards on our side of it. After some difficulty we got within about 50 yards of the bridge, and I noticed that the Huns could still crawl across, although it was badly damaged. Allowing for further demolitions, I didn't think we should have much trouble in getting a footbridge across the ruins. We were nearly caught once and lay between the water and the towpath, while a party of about 10 Huns walked along the path, not 10 feet away, got back safely in the small hours, and had a short rest in soaking clothes on the farmhouse floor. I am too exhausted to feel tired. October 22. Apparently some of our people have got across the canal farther to the north, and at 9 a.m. the attack was resumed on that side with a view to forcing the Huns out of their position. Our orders were to cooperate by means of a demonstration against the canal, but the machine gun fire was too heavy and we could do nothing except waste a lot of ammunition. I only remember seeing a German once during the whole day, and yet the slightest exposure on our part was answered by an immediate burst of fire. They stuck it very well, because the fighting on their right flank was very heavy, and they would all have been taken if we had got through. For several hours during the morning, the rifle and machine gun fire on our left was very heavy, and the 18-pounders were continuously in action. Towards noon, a battery of 68-pounders came into action, and also some howitzers. Several fires broke out in the houses, but the shells had no effect on the concealed gunners in the canal banks, and we waited in vain for the blue rocket that was to signal us forward. About 2 o'clock an intelligence officer came round, and we learnt that the Germans stuck very hard this morning. We made practically no progress as a result of the battle, and our losses have been heavy. At 4:30 the attack on our left was resumed, and the Queens made a very gallant advance, which brought them down almost as far as our left flank on the canal. Unfortunately, there was no support, and before dusk the weary men had to retreat to their original position. On our immediate right there was very little opposition, and the Durhams are firmly established across the canal. Farther south, however, our right division repeated the performance of the Queens on a larger scale, and had to abandon a hardly won bridgehead across the river after a day of strenuous fighting. At 8 p.m. I was informed by brigade that, owing to the retirement of the Queens, I was covering a half-mile gap, and should take steps accordingly. I mounted a piquet with the Lewis gun a few hundred yards forward of the farm, and sent out patrols every half hour, but the night passed off without incident. I took out 2 patrols myself, but could find neither our own people nor Huns. We have had a bad day today. Hard fighting, heavy losses, and no progress. People at home seem to think that we are chasing a beaten army which runs so fast that we cannot keep in touch with them. Would that it were true, but we have been badly mauled today, and there is precious little offensive spirit in our 19-year-olds. I saw a boy of the Middlesex coming back with a finger shot away. They had run against a farmhouse with 3 Huns and a machine gun, and had lost 4 men in taking it. He said that the bloody Hards had lived up to their name again. Our casualties! And yet there was a day on Zandvoorde Ridge when 23 men, left out of 800, lay behind the piled-up bodies of their dead and held the line against the flower of the Pomeranian Guard. And they didn't talk of diehards. October 23, the brigade was taken out of the line this morning, and at noon we had rejoined our transport. We were under orders to move almost at once, and dragged ourselves wearily onto the road, the men singing a doleful dirge. I'm sure we can't stick it no longer. For the sake of example, I hobbled too, but would have sold my soul to get on Rosie's back. To kill the temptation, I loaded 4 men's packs across her. After dark, we came across a battery of field guns standing to with their trails half across the road. By skillful driving and occasionally taking a wheel over the trails, we got the limbers and the tool carts past, but it was too much for the last pontoon. Her off hind wheel hit a trail. The wheel. Horses slipped on the pave, and the whole contraption slithered sideways into the ditch. I wanted to cry, but fortunately found the necessary relief in telling the gunners what I thought of them. It took us almost an hour to get the wagon clear, and it was midnight before the men were into billets. There was a pile of straw for me in front of a roaring fire in the farmhouse kitchen. I collapsed onto this, too exhausted even to loosen my boots or my tunic collar. October 24. Let there be no mistake. Last night was the happiest night of my life, and getting up at 6 o'clock this morning was the most wonderful thing that I have ever done. I looked into a mirror and realized with amusement why the old farmer was so terrified when I staggered in last night. The scar under my left eye is still prominent. My clothes were sodden, and even my tousled hair was matted with mud. With the exception of my tunic, all my uniform is standard Tommy outfit, and I wore a 5 days' growth of beard. Surely a more unkempt-looking brigand never masqueraded as a British officer. I looked at my great murderous molars and wondered idly how they had evolved from the sensitive, manicured fingers that used to pen theses on colloidal fuel and the theory of heat distribution in cylinder walls, and I found the comparison good. No orders came through for us during the day, but we heard that another early morning attack on the canal had failed. All honor to those Hun machine gunners. After a day of strenuous cleaning, the company paraded in the afternoon and looked ready once more for anything that Hill could offer. I counted the faces that I could remember from the beginning, but there were very few left, and myself the only officer. It struck me, too, that the very men left were the ones who had run the greatest risks, hard, bitten devils like Stevens, who had been in the thick of every mess the company had struck. Perhaps it is true that where there is no fear, there is no danger. October 25. Spent another quiet day, but was rushed into the war again at very short notice in the evening. Out all night with 2 sections assisting forward company to put a trestle bridge across the canal lower down. There was an enormous German timber dump close at hand, and although most of the yard was burning fiercely, we saved enough material to make an excellent job of the bridge. The German engineers are very thorough in their demolitions, and have made a perfect ruin of miles of this canal. Apparently their explosive charges are much more liberal than we use ourselves. Returned to the company in a drizzling dawn, but were cheered to note droves of prisoners along the road and hear that we have gone forward again. October 26. At 4:30 received orders to move company to billets in a farm far behind us and near to Coultry, obviously to undergo a fattening process for further slaughter. After our arrival in the evening, I had another of my black fits for no reason whatever. They occur more frequently now, and I must surely break up soon. The sober truth is that I am about as much use here now as my grandmother would be. But even if I am a wreck, it is sweet to feel that I have wanted 10 times more smashing than any of the others. I have given the fates a run for their money, and I believe I blew them once or twice. October 27. I have been in the saddle all day, and feel like a king tonight. Silence and peace over the whole quiet countryside, and, as I rode home in the twilight, a touch of frost in the air to catch the horse's breath and make my blood tingle. Oh, it was good to be alive, to feel the power of the horse beneath me, to feel the strength returning to my own shattered body, and, above all, to think of cheerful firesides down there among the trees, where the wood smoke mingled with the gathering mists. I saw an English village with a quaint old Norman church, and there, too, the mists were gathering in the meadows round about. October 28. Now we know why we are here, to train, practice, and rehearse for the crossing of the Skell T. All the Corps engineers met in conference in the town, and spent the day designing and testing various types of footbridge. The men had the pontoons out, and the officers spent the day in polishing up their drill. I saw where we crossed the first time in the driving rain, with the machine guns hammering in the houses in front of us, and I saw the spot where I nursed the first pontoon bridge through an interminable night. But how different now! A company of Canadian railway troops were making a permanent bridge on the very spot where my crazy pontoons had all but foundered. A broad gauge loco was hauling ballast up to the very edge of the river, and a steam pile. Driver hissed and chattered over the trestle. After all, our pontoons had played their part, and it was comforting to see how our feeble vanguard efforts were followed up. Returned to the farm, I was delighted to hear that the recommendations for military medals had passed through. My own D's has dwindled into another mention in dispatches. October 29. More conferences and bridge building. I have been asked to reconnoitre the existing bridges over the river, and the Huns are half a mile on this side of them. Spent several hours studying maps and aeroplane photos and discussing ways and means. October 30. More conferences and training. Completed my plans and decided to take Stevens out with me on the night of the 31st. October 31. At 2:30 p.m. I lay down quite peacefully, intending to sleep until dusk, when I could set out on my venture. I was looking forward to it, and felt perfectly confident. Just as I was dozing off, the orderly corporal came in, bringing, of all things, a warrant for me to go on leave tomorrow. Instantly the whole affair changed, and I was seized with a blue, shivering funk. In 6 hours I was due to go through the German lines, and there, lying on the table, was a bit of paper waiting to take me to England in the morning. It was the cruelest stroke of all, for I felt certain that I should never return. I went back to my bunk and sweated and shivered with fear. My mind and my body seemed to be completely separated from each other, and I found it quite impossible to stop the quaking of my limbs. I saw death in 1,000 forms, just as on the night before the attack at Courtrai. Sleep was impossible, so I got up at last and wrote these lines with a trembling hand. The others are chipping me about my last will and testament, and there is the usual fatuous talk of medals. Day says that if I come back they will roll all my previous non-fructifying recommendations into one and make it a real VC. At last, oh, God, if they only knew, and they looked to me as a sort of Bayard, written at Calais waiting for leave boat. After leaving the mess and that infernal warrant, I calmed down somewhat and was able to get my mind onto the work ahead. My old campaigning instincts began to return, and I became once more a scout, clear-headed and fearless. It was a grand night for my work, miserable and stormy, with rain and hail blowing in the gusty wind. Arrived in the outpost, it dawned on me that Stevens would be quite useless, and I couldn't remember why I had ever decided to take him. If things went all right, he could do nothing, and if they found us, it would be 2 corpses instead of 1. He pleaded to come with me, and I had to hurt his feelings to get rid of him. I got all the information I could from the outpost officers, said goodbye to them, and went forward towards the river. It was then about half a mile in front of me, and separated from our posts by a belt of marsh and flooded fields. This belt was traversed by 2 roads with a small bridge in each where they crossed a stream running parallel to the main river. I had to investigate these 2 roads and bridges and the main bridge, where the 2 roads joined across the river. It was my plan to work up one road, look at the river and the main bridge, and then return down the other road. There was practically no cover on the road, but the night was dark, and I felt fairly safe along the water's edge. I calculated that I had gone 200 yards, and then I waited, as I was a little nervous at having heard nothing, and felt certain that there would be posts along the road. After 5 minutes, I heard the tapping of a mallet on stakes, and knew that they were wiring some 200 yards down the road. Still, I waited, but I had no clear notion why. I assumed, of course, that there were protective troops on this side of the wiring party, but it was instinct rather than reason which made me halt. I was just preparing to go forward again when 2 men rose out of the road not 15 yards away, walked a few paces up and down the road, and then appeared to lie down again. I had all but walked onto their rifles, and my heart thumped crazily. There was nothing for it but to take to the water and the marsh. I retreated 20 yards and waded in, holding my revolver over my head. It was deathly cold, and after about 100 yards I nearly gave it up. At times the water was up to my shoulders, and I seemed to make no progress. The noise of the working party guided me, and eventually I judged that I was behind them and therefore about in line with the first small bridge. About this time I realized that another 5 minutes in the water would kill me, and I struck back for the road, regardless of everything except a desire to get on dry land. Unfortunately, I blundered into a colony of waterfowl, and they flew up all round my head, making a terrific noise. My heart stood still, and I waited again. Was there a scout among those Huns on the road who could read the meaning of the terrified waterfowl? Apparently not, for I still heard the regular tapping of the mallets, and several minutes later I was lying exhausted by the roadside. I half-emptied my flask and pushed on up the road. I was right in the middle of the Huns now, and crawling on my stomach as I did not know how near or far they might be. I thought the cold would kill me, and wondered what the Huns would think to find a dead Englishman inside their line. To my unspeakable delight, there was no one on the bridge, and I was able to make a thorough examination. I laughed at the Huns working solemnly down the road, and for a second forgot my terrible condition. Here I think my mind went a little dull, as I blundered straight on down the road until I had almost reached the river and the main bridge. It was sheer madness, but I would certainly have perished without the movement to aid my circulation. I remember thinking grimly that it would be just my fate to die of a cold after all that I had been through. I found a lot of Huns round the bridge, so I struck the river about 100 yards above it, and then worked down under cover of the banks. I spent some 20 minutes under the bridge, and all the time I could hear their voices in the darkness above me. The meaning of their words was drowned by the noise of the wind and the rain. Now I had to get back down the other road before it began to grow light, and, as I truly imagined, deliver my message before I died. Half a mile inside the Hun lines, after spending 2 hours up to my shoulders in water on a November night, my condition is better imagined than described. I ate a sodden mass of crumbs and bully that had once been sandwiches in my pocket, and finished the rum. I was nearly caught in getting to the downstream side of the bridge, and lay shivering under a hedge for several minutes while a party marched by within 3 paces of my head. I think they were the working party off the road, and I noticed that it was beginning to grow lighter. Luckily, the storm grew worse. Eventually, I got onto the second road and crawled back along the water's edge until I came to my last bridge. There was a German machine gun party sitting right in the middle of it. My brain was still perfect, but I had lost all sense of feeling in my body. I wanted to cry. They sat there between me and England, and I believe I had some idea of getting up and asking them to let me go home. For a few minutes, I had no more willpower than a child. Then some of our shells came over, and I could hear them bursting on the road over the bridge. There was only one way back, and that was as I had come, through the water. I forgot all about the stream and waded in. The cold seemed to pull me together, although, God knows, nothing could be colder than my own body. There was a bit of dry land between the flood and the stream, but I got across without being seen. I was keeping close to the bridge in the hope of seeing something of it as I passed. If I couldn't wade the stream, I was done, but I determined to try, even if my head was under water and I had to hold my breath. It was not more than 5 feet deep in the center, and I got across and so over the bank into the flood on the far side. I had still to keep to the water, as I was afraid there would be a patrol on the road in advance of the people on the bridge. A few of our shells were still falling on the road, and I could hear the angry hisses as the red-hot bits of steel rained into the water round about. I did about 200 yards like this, and then I gave up. It was either the road or collapse and drown in the water. I got onto the road, worked back carefully until I felt safe, and then ran like the devil until I knew I was inside our posts. When I stopped, I nearly fainted, so I set off again, my head pulling me up into the clouds like a bubble and my legs holding me to the road as if they were tons of lead. Eventually, I came across some gunners and they marveled at the whiskey I drank. I told them I had been out scouting and slipped into some water. I didn't really know what had happened just at the time. I had vague impressions of a mass of water and some Germans sitting on a bridge refusing to let me go home. Then I fell asleep, just sat down bang on the mess floor and collapsed. They woke me after a couple of hours, lent me a horse and directed me to the company. Tomorrow I shall be in England.